Night's Watch Rangers are known for their ability to blend into the wilderness, lying in ambush for their enemies. Such assaults are even more devastating when delivered on horseback. Hiding cavalry proves tricky in most any terrain, but the Ranger Vanguards know the woods north of the wall better than anyone. Thick copses of trees, hidden dells, and even mild depressions in the terrain provide plenty of territory from which to surprise foes. Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name is Brian, and in this video I wanted to talk about one of the more recent releases for A Song of Ice and Fire the Miniatures game by Cool Mini or Not, and we're taking a peek at the Ranger Vanguards for the Night's Watch. Now, this unit comes with 4 unique sculpts, and they're all on horseback. Of course, it's a cavalry unit, and there's no attachments in here or anything, so nothing fancy, but it kind of settles a old image that was in, I believe, the deluxe version of the rulebook for those Kickstarter backers. The ranger that's depicted on the card was wasn't hidden. It was in the book in the rulebook, and so people were just wondering, what is this thing? It looks like a sworn brother on a horse, and now we finally have the answer with this particular box. The Ranger Vanguard come in at 7 points for a unit with speed 6. They have the longsword attack that hits on 3s, and then the decay for that is 7-5. They have a 5+ defense save and a 5+ morale, so they're moderately survivable. They're not hanging their hat on their defense save, but they are sporting a pretty decent morale that should keep them around a little bit longer because they shouldn't be failing panic tests that frequently. They, of course, have the cavalry rule where they get their 3 wounds, and then at the start of the unit's activation, they can perform 1 maneuver action. They also have the rule ambush tied to their melee attack, and that just states that enemies that this unit successfully charges in the flank or rear become panicked and weakened. The final rule that they bring with them is Outflank. You may hold this unit off the table or in reserve instead of deploying them. When a friendly NCU claims the maneuver position or the horse on the tactics board, you can replace that zone's effect with deploy 1 unit from reserve fully within short range of any flank edge. Or flank table edge, sorry. So the Ranger Vanguards themselves, they're quite pricey at 7 points, but we're used to that in Night's Watch, at least, and having a lot of elite units anyhow. The ambush is it's a unique ability, I'll say. It's not unlikely for you to get there with a cavalry with a speed 6 move and having outflank. Like it shouldn't be difficult for this to happen. Panicked and weakened for me feel like a weird combination of condition tokens. I like the panicked and vulnerable from Warcry because I do think of all the rules in the game, Warcry is probably the most broken mechanic or ability that's out there right now. I think it's just a little too powerful. But Panicked and Weakened put you in this really weird zone because the unit itself doesn't have like the melee oomph. I mean, they're throwing 7 dice hitting on 3s, but there's nothing to really modify that. So you are hoping that you can get that your opponent fails some of those armor or defense saves, and then that goes through so that you can use the panic token if you get the flank. Now you'll have the sundering bonus from flank, but I don't know if that's enough really, because I think if your opponent's a little bit more savvy, they'll realize that they need to be prepared for an outflank unit. And then on the bounce back, having weakened on them does help out their survivability a little bit. And maybe, I'm not talking myself into thinking that ambush is a great ability for this unit because their defense save is not great. So having the weakened token as a response to going into your opponents is decent. But I just don't, there's something funky with having a unit like this where it's, maybe vulnerable and panicked are too ridiculous for ambush, but I just don't know if I really find the value in it. So that's definitely food for thought. Outflank in general, I've pretty much, I think I've gone on the record saying that outflank is a rule that I don't quite appreciate. You're taking a unit that doesn't, like cavalry units don't really need to be outflank. I mean, they can get places, like that's not an issue. Like if they're on the side of the table, if they're coming in on the side of the table, yeah, they can jolt through and get into the ranks or the rear or the sides, and it forces your opponent to play differently. But you're taking an NCU's activation, and not only if it's an NCU that replaces abilities, you're losing out on that. And if it's an NC, or if you actually want that maneuver early, you're also losing out on the ability for that. Plus, your opponent can manipulate that a little bit. We just got done talking about Christopher Botley. He could shut you down for a turn and then take the horse out from under you, so you could have a lot of points sitting off the table. Now, thinking about that, if you're playing in a 2-list environment, you probably shouldn't be dropping outflank units into somebody who can shut down your access to these zones, but it is something to consider with outflank. It can be a powerful ability, but given that Night's Watch is a little bit more on the elite side, I think you can maybe funnel your opponent to direct their attention in a specific fashion to go after some of your units. So you might be able to set up a difficult decision for your opponent with being, do I want to prepare for the outflank, or am I going to deal with this like Megatron Sworn Brother unit coming at me or something like that? So it has its value, but it's a very fluid value. It's very open to interpretation on each game. So Night's Watch does have some interesting ways to kind of modify how these function on the table, and they have a couple attachments available to them with cavalry. And the first one I want to talk about is the Watch Marshal. Now, he brings the order for 1 point. The Watch Marshal brings the order Adaptive Planning and Swift Retreat. So Adaptive Planning just states that you can target one combat unit in long range and then replace a condition token on that unit with any other condition token, and that starts at the beginning of any turn. And then the order Swift Retreat is triggered when an enemy completes a melee attack against the unit, and then this unit performs 1 retreat action. So this attachment kind of fixes some of the issues that I have with the Ranger Vanguard at face value. I can take my tokens that I don't feel are as valuable and change them into something that I do, kicking off that panic token from a real good morale unit to turn it into a vulnerable token, or maybe he can help out some other Night's Watch units by kind of changing things around in other places. Swift Retreat is really cool with this unit because you can retreat off the thing that's fighting you, and then just go off and zoom into the flank or rear of another unit. Like the unit you retreat from is not the unit that you need to keep going after, so you can kind of get a little bit slippery with this, and it forces, like, again, it's another thing that forces your opponent to really think about what they're trying to do, because if they go too deep into the rabbit hole of trying to figure out how's my opponent going to utilize this unit, they could definitely trip up on something and then miss one of these opportunities that you're trying to set yourself up for. Another really great attachment for this unit is going to be the new Coldhands Former Crow. Now, for 1 point, you get access to 2 really neat abilities. You've got the Order Sentinel that states after another friendly unit within long range is attacked, this unit can perform 1 charge or maneuver action, and if charging, it must target the attacker. The other ability just modifies the unit in general. It's the Intimidating Presence, where enemies engaged with this unit suffer -1 to morale test rolls and +1 wound from failing panic test rolls. So I think this alters the unit to be a little bit more aggressive. So the Watch Captain makes them more, adaptable, I guess, might be that's not really the word I'm looking for, but it makes them a little bit more utility, and Coldhands makes them a little bit more brutal, and something that, again, I guess it is also quite disruptive. Like, Sentinel for 1 point on a cavalry unit is pretty dang good, in my opinion, and this way your opponent really has to think a lot about what kind of what their order of attack is going to be, and if they're attacking another unit, chances are that the Vanguard Ranger Vanguards can get into a flank or rear and then make things difficult for them with that ambush token. Intimidating Presence also kind of utilizes that panic token a little bit more from ambush, and if you're getting in on a side or a flank, you're already taking negatives off, or you're already stacking debuffs on the morale stat. So I think that Coldhands seems like a pretty decent pick for this unit. I do think there's just a moment of honorable mention for the Watch Marshal solo. Now, the Watch Marshal itself is really good in general. It's a very inexpensive very inexpensive activation, and he offers a couple other cool abilities that this unit can take advantage of as well. He does have the Order Tactical Reposition, so he can target a friendly unit within short range and have them perform a 3-inch shift. Then he has in his martial ability, he gets the 3 wounds, the cavalry move, and all that. But then he also adds the ability, other friendly units within short range gain +1 attack die on melee attacks, and that shifts this unit to an 8/6, which is a little bit more on the aggressive side. It pushes that needle a little bit. So I could see this kind of being run around in combination with one of the units. You could use the Watch Marshal as maybe a distraction piece, or if your opponent goes into the Vanguard, then you have the ability to have the Watch Marshal just kind of get into rears or flanks where they can be a little bit more effective, because they do throw 3 dice hitting on 3s, and that's not nothing, right? Especially if you happen to have Coldhands in that unit, then you're getting the intimidating presence bonus as well. So I think it's worth mentioning the Watch Marshal in trying to determine the efficacy of the Vanguard unit, especially if you're taking, it's pretty expensive at 7 points, and then adding another attachment to it also kind of drives the cost up. So it's a way of trying to mitigate the opportunity cost of having a really expensive unit by getting another activation that's fairly inexpensive. So we can take a look at some of the commanders that I appreciate with this unit, and the first one I want to go over is going to be J.R. Mormont, the 997th Lord Commander. Now his actual attachment doesn't really do much for them. He doesn't influence. He mostly just influences the unit that he's on, but he has some decent command cards for them. The first one being, and now my watch begins. This triggers when a friendly Night's Watch combat unit activates. That unit performs 1 morale test, and on a success, they choose one of these abilities. You either search your tactics deck for 1 tactics card, add it to your hand, and then discard 1 card and shuffle your tactics deck. Or search your tactics deck or discard pile for 1 tactics card that can be attached to this unit and attach it to that unit, then shuffle your deck afterwards. Now, the Ranger Vanguard don't have a whole lot of bells and whistles with their melee attack, or, you know, if they're going into something where they might take advantage of something like Shield that guards the Realm of Men, or Realms of Men, I can't remember if it's plural or not, but just being able to get what you need for this unit when you need it is a pretty good advantage. Plus, this is just a good card in general for Night's Watch to have access to. Second, we've got Live and Die at My Post. This triggers when a friendly unit passes a morale test. All enemies engaged with that unit become vulnerable, and if this targeted a Night's Watch unit, attach this card to that unit until the end of the game, and then while attached, this unit cannot lose its last remaining wound from failing panic tests. So this isn't the most groundbreaking card for them. It's nice to not be able to lose your last wound on panic. As with and now my watch begins, both of these require a morale test to be performed, and at 5+, they shouldn't have any real issues passing this. So you kind of mitigate that loss, I guess, or the risk by having 5+ morale. So the big one is just making sure enemies engaged with them are vulnerable, so that you can try and get some extra damage out from them. Like I said, the bonus of not losing your last wound to panic could be quite effective, just because of, I think people really do put a lot of emphasis on trying to play into panic these days, since it kind of increases lethality and brings it back to maybe a little bit where this previous world of Ice and Fire we're living in is. But a decent card for them nonetheless. The final card that JR brings is Night Gathers. This triggers at the start of any turn. You target 1 friendly engaged Night's Watch unit, and that unit performs 1 morale test. On a success, you attach this card to them until the end of the game, and while attached, each time an enemy is performing a melee attack on this unit, before rolling attack dice, the attacker suffers 1 hit for each remaining rank in this unit. So this isn't the most amazing card for a cavalry unit, because you only have the ability to get 2 ranks, so you're losing out on some of that extra oomph from having that 3rd rank. But it's not terrible. I mean, like, you could find worse places to put this, I guess, but your opponent's going to be punished for attacking them by taking a couple hits, and like I said, it's not terrible, but not amazing. So as Night's Watch players, we've been gifted with a Ranger unit, and I feel like I can't go much further in this without talking about Benjen Stark, the first Ranger. So the cards that he brings along with him are Hit and Run. After a friendly unit completes a melee attack, that unit performs 1 retreat action, and if it was a Ranger's unit, the enemy it any enemies it disengages become weakened. So this is, if you're playing with the Watch Marshal on the Vanguard, then this is not really the most amazing card unless you're retreating often and going into other units that are attacking you in succession. So I don't know if that's really what I would point that at. But if you were running a Coldhands Vanguard unit, hit and run could be pretty brutal because your opponent's like, okay, I'm gonna hit these Vanguard and try and deal with that, and they're like, oh, I hit and run, and now you put them in a position where you're able to get Sentinel off pretty easily, and your opponent kind of gets put up against the wall a little bit with that. Sometimes they might just have to take that Sentinel charge, and there's no getting around it. So I think hit and run is pretty decent, unless they want to retreat, and if they do, then cool, because you're either getting them off an objective or exposing them to other dangers, because they're either giving the flank or rear to the unit that they retreated from, or you're able to get that pretty easily with the Vanguard. Next, we have Lying in Wait, and this triggers when an enemy combat unit activates. You target one friendly unactivated Ranger unit within long range that has line of sight to that enemy, and then they perform one ranged attack on that enemy. So this affects the Ranger Vanguard in 0 ways, but the Rangers do have some interesting shooting options that I think they'll be able to take advantage of, and you can probably hold off on activating a lot of those ranged units because your opponent would be dealing with your Ranger Hunters or your Ranger Vanguard. Next up, we have Hunter's Insight. This triggers when or at the start of a friendly turn, and you target one enemy within long range of one friendly Ranger unit and choose one of these modes. One friendly unit within long range of that enemy performs a 3-inch shift. Friendly units may reroll attack and charge dice when targeting that enemy unit, and that enemy unit may not use any orders or be the target of friendly tactics cards that turn. So I think that this card's pretty decent for Benjen Stark, and having the Vanguard outflank or getting around the table easily means that it's going to be less likely for your opponent to get out from long range from any Ranger unit. Like, they're going to be in long range no matter what. So I think that the Hunter Vanguards they don't turn the card on, so to speak, but they definitely make it a little bit more easy to trigger and get use out of between those 3 different variables. So a couple final thoughts on the Ranger Vanguard. I think that a lot of people, like, I don't have my fingers on the pulse of Night's Watch's reactions to releases, but I don't think people are particularly jazzed about this unit right now, and a lot of that might have to do with the face value of it, because the Ranger Vanguard just seem like there are a lot of points for not a whole lot of like pizzazz, and the only way you can really turn them up is by putting some of these attachments in to modify them a little bit, and Benjen Stark definitely would like to have some more synergy with them, but I don't think he has enough to really like make them super attractive with him. The other thing that makes Benjen Stark really difficult to look at when looking, or to bring into the conversation when looking at the Vanguard Rangers, is that Cold Hands is just so good on them that I don't feel like if I'm ever going to bring Ranger Vanguards, I'm never going to be bringing them with Benjen Stark as the commander, because I'll typically be having Cold Hands on them just because of the way that I like to play the game. So I guess maybe I do need to backtrack a little bit, because I think I said if you have Cold Hands on the unit and you play hit and run, then that would be cool. But I guess I've just realized that you can't do that. I don't know what I was thinking. But at any rate, so that synergy's out the window. So I don't think there's a whole lot going on here with Benjen Stark, and maybe it's a greater conversation about what Benjen Stark actually brings to the army. But I think to maybe kind of smooth over some of the lackluster responses to maybe the Vanguard Rangers or Ranger Vanguards, is that this unit seems to get more of its value on the table than by the numbers. And if you're a person who likes to play tricky, or likes to try and pin your opponent into making really tough decisions, I think that the Ranger Vanguards might be a unit that you would find value in. I do think that there are a couple base tactics cards for Night's Watch that can help them out quite a bit. I mean, Sword in the Darkness makes it so that the defender that you're engaged with becomes panicked and vulnerable, and then you always get 1 attack die for the rest of the game, so that helps them out quite a bit. And then Light That Brings the Dawn can make sure that they're, doing a lot of work without a whole bunch of ranks. And since they're always, not always, since they're typically going to be attacking units with more ranks than them, they'll be able to get the full value out of Light That Brings the Dawn. So I think it's easy to discount Ranger Vanguard as being just kind of like a bottom of the barrel unit. Like, it's always tough when you're talking about outflank units because they take a little bit more farting around to get to work. But I think, like I said, putting them on the table and kind of seeing how they can make some shenanigans work is probably going to maybe open your mind a little bit more to accepting this in your Night's Watch army. But they do have a pretty hefty price tag points wise, and I don't know if that 7 points plus attachments really comes with enough value for them to work on their own. They really do seem to they want to take a lot of buffs from a lot of different commanders, but I don't think there's one commander that really like makes them sing a whole bunch. So let me know in the comments below what you think about Ranger Vanguard. It's not that I'm down on them, it's just that I think that they're much more something you need to see on the table in order to respect them instead of just looking at their raw stats. So if you've gotten a chance to use them in games, let us know how you've been utilizing them. And thanks for sticking around to the end of this one. I do like making these, and I'm almost caught up with this wave. I think I've just got Greyjoy Heroes 2 to do left, or 2. The second Greyjoy's Heroes box. And then I can transition into some of the more fresh releases. So we're getting there. It's just taken a hot minute. So I appreciate everybody kind of bearing with me as I go through the older stuff here, like older in quotes, right? But thanks again, and I appreciate you tuning in.